It started on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A young black child, full of innocence, took just a few steps outside, only to be stopped by someone who believed they had the power to control where he could and couldn't go. What happened next wasn't just shocking. It revealed the dark reality of prejudice hiding behind polished fences and manicured lawns. But the real twist? No one could have predicted who was about to step forward, turning the story upside down.
Before that chilling afternoon, life for 8-year-old Malik was simple, filled with the kinds of joys every child deserves. He loved riding his scooter up and down the driveway, chasing after his little sister, and waving at neighbors as they passed. His laughter often echoed through the cul-de-sac, a sound that brought warmth to his mother, who had worked tirelessly to give her children a safe and stable home. Malik's family had recently moved into this suburban neighborhood, hoping for a fresh start. The streets looked peaceful, the lawns carefully trimmed, the houses nearly identical in design, a place where safety seemed guaranteed. To Malik, it felt like a world of new adventures waiting to happen. But beneath the surface of those quiet streets, not everyone saw Malik with the same innocence his mother did. Some neighbors carried unspoken judgments, whispering behind closed doors, watching with suspicion instead of welcome. Malik, of course, was far too young to notice the tension building in the shadows. To him, the world was still a place to explore, full of wonder and possibility. But that sense of freedom was about to be interrupted. On that day, when he pushed the door open with excitement, eager to step outside, Malik had no idea someone was already watching, ready to remind him, in the harshest way, that even in a picture-perfect neighborhood, prejudice can hide in plain sight.
The day had begun like any other, with Malik's laughter filling the house. His mother had stepped into the kitchen to prepare lunch, glancing every so often at the window to see her son playing happily. For her, these small moments were proof that all the sacrifices she had made were worth it. But outside, not everyone viewed Malik as just another child at play. The local homeowners association president, a woman named Mrs. Caldwell, had been watching him closely for weeks. To her, Malik's presence wasn't joyful, it was suspicious. She convinced herself that he didn't belong in this neighborhood, despite the fact that Malik's family had every right to call it home. That afternoon, as Malik reached for the doorknob to step out onto the porch, Mrs. Caldwell marched across the lawn with determination. She spotted him alone and decided to act, her mind filled with twisted notions of authority. Without hesitation, she grabbed his arm, yanking him back into the doorway. Malik froze in shock. He was just a child, yet the grip on his arm was tight and forceful, stripping away the safety he had always felt at home. He struggled, reaching toward the sunlight, but Mrs. Caldwell pulled harder, her voice sharp and filled with accusation. Inside, Malik's mother heard the commotion and rushed toward the door. What she found was every parent's nightmare, her son being restrained by a stranger, treated like a criminal for the color of his skin. Panic surged, but so did anger. She demanded Mrs. Caldwell release her child immediately. The neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise. Some stood in silence, unsure of what was happening. Others whispered, their eyes filled with judgment rather than compassion. Instead of defending Malik, many turned their suspicion toward him, as though his very existence was the problem. Malik's mother shielded him, pulling him close. But Mrs. Caldwell didn't back down. She insisted she had the authority to question children in the neighborhood, claiming she was protecting the community. Her words dripped with false righteousness, but her actions spoke only of prejudice. The situation escalated quickly. Malik's mother's voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury, as she warned Mrs. Caldwell of the consequences. Yet Mrs. Caldwell smirked, confident that she was in control, believing her position as HOA president gave her power to intimidate. The tension thickened in the air. Malik, clinging to his mother's side, couldn't understand why he was being treated this way. All he knew was that for the first time, his home no longer felt safe. But Mrs. Caldwell was about to learn a painful lesson. What she didn't know was that Malik's mother was far from powerless. And when the truth surfaced, the entire neighborhood would never forget the moment prejudice collided with justice.
The shouting at the doorway grew louder, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Malik's mother stood her ground, shielding her son with one arm while glaring at Mrs. Caldwell. But instead of backing down, Mrs. Caldwell doubled her grip, her face twisted with false authority. "You don't belong here," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence that had fallen over the watching crowd. The neighbors murmured, some nodding in agreement, others frozen with unease. For Malik, every second felt heavier, his heart racing, his tiny hands clutching his mother's sleeve. Fear and anger collided inside his mother, but beneath it all was something Mrs. Caldwell could never have anticipated: strength backed by power. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her phone from her pocket. With unwavering calm, she said, "You've made a grave mistake." The crowd leaned in. What could she mean? Mrs. Caldwell scoffed, convinced she had the upper hand. But then Malik's mother revealed the truth. She wasn't just any concerned parent. She was a federal judge, a woman who had dedicated her life to upholding justice, and now justice was standing directly in front of Mrs. Caldwell. The murmurs shifted instantly. Neighbors who once whispered accusations now gasped, their faces turning pale. Mrs. Caldwell's confidence faltered, her grip loosening as the realization sank in. The very person she tried to intimidate was someone with the authority to hold her accountable in ways she never imagined. Malik's mother's voice cut through the tension like steel. "You will answer for this." And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. The neighborhood, once silent accomplices, now stood as witnesses. Prejudice had revealed its ugliest face, and justice was about to strike back.
The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Malik's quiet sobs as he clung to his mother. Mrs. Caldwell, once so sure of her authority, now stood frozen, her arrogance stripped away by the truth. The neighbors who had gathered shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had witnessed not just an argument, but an act of racism that could no longer be ignored. Malik's mother, standing tall and unwavering, calmly guided her son inside, away from the chaos. But before closing the door, she left the crowd with words that would echo long after that day. "This is not just about my child. This is about every child who deserves to feel safe where they live." In that moment, the neighborhood's perfect image cracked. The reality was laid bare. Prejudice had lived quietly among them, tolerated until it finally crossed the line. Malik's innocence was scarred, but his mother's strength turned pain into a powerful reminder. Racism may wear a polished smile, hide behind titles, or dress itself in false authority, but it will always be exposed when confronted with truth and justice. For Malik, the lesson was painful, but profound. He learned that the world is not always fair, but he also learned the unshakable power of standing up for what is right. And for those neighbors, there would be no forgetting the day a child's tears forced them to face their own silence. Because racism isn't just about one confrontation, it's about the choices people make every single day. Do they look away, or do they speak up? So ask yourself, if this unfolded on your street, in your neighborhood, Would you stay silent? Or would you take a stand?